Are you creative? A lot of people tell me I'm not creative. I don't have creative ideas. I don't have ideas at all. And I find this quite frustrating. And at the same time, I don't really believe them because I think we're all creative. We all have so many creative ideas, but sometimes they're just buried and we haven't used our creative and idea generation or generating machine within ourselves. And what I want to do today is share with you two exercises, two methods of how you can get your creative juices up and running again. So if you think maybe I'm not so creative, then let me give you some ideas of how you can get more creative. So these are two exercises and they're both around objects, but one of them is more around how we can generate as million ideas and as many ideas as possible around one object. The other one is more around one object and how we can go a bit deeper. So let's get started. The first idea is a very classical one. It's called the bricks method. And the bricks method says that you have a brick and think about as many ideas that you can think of what you can do with a brick. Probably you know this, the brick method. But what can you use a brick for? You can use a brick in a very classical way. I want to build a wall. But you can also use the brick, for example, as a holder for your books in a bookshelf so they don't fall down. Or you can use a brick for a table. So you have a plate and you want to put the plate not on the floor, but maybe you want to put the plate on a bit like higher. And then you can do that. You put it a bit higher and you have kind of a table. Or you have a table, but it's kind of broken, one of the legs, and it's really unstable. So what you can do is you can put the brick below and one of the legs, and then you have a table that is stable again. Or maybe you're a parachuter and you are at the top of the mountain and it's very windy and your parachute kind of seems to directly always fly around and it's really difficult for you to hold it. So maybe, before going off, you can use a brick and put the brick on top of the parachute and just make sure that it doesn't fly around. Obviously, make sure not to break it, but just, something is flying around and you kind of want to stop having this from flying around. Or you can also use a brick in a maybe more experimental way and can say, I kind of want to build a playground for my children and I have a brick. Maybe I can use a hammer and make the brick bring the brick into several pieces. And by breaking them into several pieces, now I have several bricks or several pieces of the brick. And then my children can use those pieces and build something new out of those different pieces. Doesn't have to be a brick, could be whatever. So this is the classical bricks exercise. But I want to give you not only the bricks exercise, but some additional ideas of how you can use the bricks exercise. So one additional example of classical brick example or brick exercise could be that you change the object. Instead of using bricks, you could, for example, use spoons. And with spoons, it's similar. How can you use a spoon? Yeah, sure. You can just eat with a spoon. You can eat soup or whatever you want to eat with a spoon. You can also scoop ice with a spoon. Or maybe you want to plant a new tree or plant a new flower or some vegetables. And you need to get the seed into the earth. So maybe you can, do a little bit of digging a little hole with a spoon, put the seeds in, and then you can plant your plants. Or maybe a bit more creative idea is that you can heat up your spoon and then you heat it up in a way that you can kind of clip it. And then you have kind of a clip and you can clip something. You can hold something that maybe you don't want to hold with your hands. And instead you can use the spoon that you kind of clipped. So you see again a lot of different options. I won't give you more options because you can try it out yourself. A third idea of how you can use this bricks method is one that I saw myself, and that's very funny. And it is around a piece of paper. And on the piece of paper, you have 25 black wings or like circles. And the idea is come up with as many ideas of how to draw something in the circles. And what you see is that probably in the first round, a lot of people just draw smileys within the circles. But at one point, they don't draw smileys in the circle, but they start to add some ears, add some eyes, add some hair that is not within the circles, but outside the circles or on the touching grounds of the circle. And then what you see as well is that some people are especially creative. They start to draw cars because then they use 2 of the circles as 2 wheels or 3 wheels or 4 wheels, and they build and draw some cars or some trains. Or you have people that draw a snake, and they draw a snake out of 25 circles. So they just have a snake that is going and running through 25 circles. And then there's some other people that say, now I had my steak. I'm done after 2 minutes, but I have another 5 minutes left. What do I do? So maybe they take another piece of paper and they draw circles themselves, and then they start drawing more snakes out of those circles. So again, you can be very creative with the method and come up with a million of ideas of how to draw something with 25 circles. Another idea that I experienced myself in an assessment center is also similar, but it's not around one object, but it's about kind of many objects. And that's very similar again as the bricks method, but instead of a brick, it was a string or a cord. And on the string, there were various objects. So there was a tissue, there was something that you hang on a Christmas tree for Christmas, or like a tree on Christmas. There was a CD, there was a little paper clip. So there were various kind of normal objects on the string. And the idea was to come up with as many ideas of what this thing could be. Very similar idea, but it's not only one object. I mean, you could say it's one object, right? And several people, and what you normally do and see is that people come up with this whole object as one object. But you can get more creative and start off not only using this one object, but then you're coming up with various objects. And you say, okay, maybe I can combine the CD with a paper clip, and I can combine this thing with a Christmas tree, the tissue. And in that way, I not only come up with this one object, but I have way more variations of how I can play around with this whole object, bringing this into pieces. So you see, this exercise has a lot of different variations that make it fun and that also allow you to be more creative. And you can do this exercise by yourself to just get your own creative juices running, but you can also use this exercise in a team or maybe in your company. So wherever you feel maybe we need some ideas for problems we currently have and we want to solve them. But just, as a starting exercise to get a bit in your creative juices, creative mindset, thinking around the box or around the corner, thinking outside of the box, these exercises can be very helpful. But these are exercises where you come up with a million of ideas around an object. What if we now move it into a new exercise, a similar exercise, but with a different angle? And that's the second exercise I want to talk with you about, or that I want to talk about today with you. And this exercise is around deepening down. So it's not around one object and coming up with a million of ideas, but instead it is around one object and exploring this one object in deep dive. So let's imagine we have a dog. How do you see the dog? How do you feel the dog? How do you experience the dog? So this exercise is around experiencing the dog. And it's an exercise that I experienced and that I tried out several times myself before COVID when I was doing improv theater. And improvisational theater, you have to come up with many ideas. And you can say, oh, that's a dog. But if you tell people, like an audience, oh, that's a dog, everyone just says, oh, yeah, that's a dog. But it's way more fun and way more interesting if you say, this is this animal that has like white hair, it's a bit fluffy, and this nose that is always a bit itchy and, and then it has some other specific things that you realize about a dog, but you don't necessarily mention that it's a dog. And the audience starts to imagine what kind of animal this could be. And in that sense, it's a way more interesting, let's say, narrative that you can give that gets the audience more excited around what you're sharing with them and brings up their own imagination. But it's not only that you can use this method in improvisational theater, but you can also use this method, as I said, for creativity, to getting your creative juices going. Because if you look at the dog, you can experience the dog. And you come up with a lot of different ideas. Okay, what is this thing, without mentioning that it's a dog? So you say, yeah, okay, I see this hair, the white hair. I see it's a bit fluffy. And I have this smell like a wet towel. When I put a wet towel somewhere on the ground close to a river, and the ground is not as clean as in your living room or in your bathroom at home. And then if you smell on this towel, it kind of smells similar. And you have this in your mind, right? Like smelling the dog and then connecting it to something else. And then you write that down. Or you say, oh, I see this white hair, but somehow, there is like a little round dot when I look a bit further and I see some black hair there. It's coming out of that. Interesting. And with that way, you explore the dog. You explore the dog from different angles and you try to come up with as many expressions and ideas and descriptions of what this thing is without mentioning that it's a dog. There are two variations of how you can do this. So one variation, example with a dog, but with any kind of objects that you can think of. It can be bookshelves, it can be books, it can be a can, it can be whatever you think of, even a laptop. There's no limitation. So with these objects, you can either do this by seeing the object and describing it without, like saying it's a dog, for example. And the other version that you can do is to say, okay, you're blindfolded. So you're not seeing what the object is and then just describing it and touching it and seeing what you see, or like describing what you feel and what you touch. And it depends a bit on which method you want to use, about the dynamics of the group and about yourself as well. Because if you give this in a group and you say, for example, I have seen this, and I have experienced it myself, when you say, okay, there's a box, for example, and you can just put in your hand and take out one object and then just touch it and experiencing it without seeing it, then some people are very anxious about this process. They don't like just putting their hand somewhere without seeing what they can touch. And so if you have people that are a bit more anxious about not seeing something, then I wouldn't do the exercise without seeing the object. And then you can do it while seeing the object. But then you have to be very careful that they're not just seeing and describing the object out of memory, but really focusing on the object that they see in front of them. Because only then, if you really explore and immerse yourself in the moment of exploring this specific object or animal or whatever, then you really get into those creative juices and exploring and finding out different angles of how you can look at this thing. As you see, there are two different options and two different variations of this exercise, but it's all around going deep and exploring and coming up with ideas of what this thing could be. And it's maybe not about just cognitive ideas, but it is around your senses. And in that sense, you have the senses and you can touch an object. I can look at an object. I can smell an object. I can feel an object. So it's not only around just coming up with ideas, but it's also around coming up with ideas connected to your senses. And this will help you in so many different ways in your, let's say, real life when you're not doing the exercise again as well. Because when you're, for example, developing a product, a tech product, and you want to have an understanding of what's going on, of how customers or clients experience the product, then you can ask those questions that get their creative juices going, and also their experience of, is it only the feel, is it only the touch, is it often the smell, like what is the whole overall experience? But also coming up with all these ideas and connecting them with your senses and coming up with ideas connected to the senses also allows you in your day-to-day life, when you have difficult situations or if you don't really know an answer, you can just try the exercises, get your creative juices going, And then think about all of those million ideas that you might have to come up with better solutions for a specific problem that you face. And you can either do this by yourself, or you can obviously do this in a group. And one extension around the exercises is that what you sometimes experience, especially in a group of people that think, oh, I'm not creative at all, that you need to give them some questions of how they can get more creative to offer them different options. For example, for the exercise that is very extensive of thinking about the brick. So for the brick, what you can do is to say, have you ever thought about a brick in a swimming pool, or a brick in a church, or a spoon in a church? What would you use it for then? So bring the bricks in different contexts, or combine the bricks with the exercise of deepening down and say, how does the brick smell? Maybe is the smell or the touch of a brick brings you to different ideas of how to use a brick. And then you can combine this and give them more ideas and more angles of where to look at for the brick. And for the other exercise, it's the same. And what you can also do for the other exercise of deepening down is that, you let them describe those objects without describing what it is. And then afterwards, they exchange their descriptions. And the other person in pairs has to kind of find out, okay, what kind of object this could be. And they start and they say, maybe that's a book, or maybe that's a dog, or maybe that's a can, or maybe that's a mouse. And in that way, you, a participant or someone that's doing this exercise, you realize, oh, interesting. I wasn't even aware of that. Maybe that's a different angle. And then through the exploration together, you get new ideas of how you can relate to this object. And again, you have more ideas. And that's the whole idea. You have more ideas, you get your creative juices going, and then you can use those exercises to bring them to real life and have more ideas and more angles of how you can solve a situation and come up with new ideas of how to make it better. I hope you like this video and you like the exercise that I shared with you. If you do, I would be really happy if you give me a like for the video, because this would help me to find out what kind of videos, what kind of content resonates with you the most. With that, have a great day.